Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another one of our live episodes of The Breakdown. One of these days we're going to start one of these shows and we're not going to have to start off with, it's been a busy week in Alberta politics, but it has been a busy week in Alberta politics. Very, very busy week in Alberta politics. So we're gonna do our typical thing. We're gonna do a quick little rundown of some of the bigger stories of the week. Unfortunately, this week was so big that even trying to get all of the things in would take way too long. So we're just going to kind of hit the broad strokes. And once that's done, we're going to do our regular open mic town hall thing. Going to be joined once again, hopefully, by a couple of politicos. Hopefully, I see Deirdre's already in the wings waiting, which is delightful because she was actually present for one of the two big political meeting gatherings, disasters in one particular case, that happened on the weekend. So hopefully Deirdre will be able to speak to that a little bit. But let's get right into the week. So one of the biggest stories that we have to start with has to be the fact that there's a new cabinet in town. Danielle Smith took up cabinetry making, and she did not go small. In fact, if you take a look at the size of the Danielle Smith cabinet as compared to really any of the cabinets over the last 20, 30 years almost, Danielle Smith's cabinet is unbelievably big. It's almost more than double most of them, and it is more than double Notley's first cabinet. This graphic, we don't have the credit up on the screen, but I'm going to throw the credit out to Dr. Jared Wesley, who's an amazing political scientist out of Edmonton. He's been on the show once, and he says very smart things and does very smart things with graphs. But it demonstrates quite clearly that Danielle Smith's cabinet is enormous. Now, because it's such a big cabinet, it's really difficult, challenging to go through all of the things and point out what the big shocking things are. Probably the biggest ones that we should probably talk about. Alberta now has not one but two deputy premiers, and one of them who has a fantastic history with authority. And in no way trying to abuse it. Casey Majou is the Deputy Premier and Minister of Skilled Trades and Professions. The other Deputy Premier is Nathan Neudorf. Now, there were some people who kept their cabinet roles, and those are in many regards. Some people are looking at it and going, oh, look at that. Maybe they drank the same Kool-Aid. Maybe they're good little poodles after all. And some people are looking at it, particularly ministries like Health, which Jason Copping kept, as a bit of a kiss of death. Because if Danielle Smith goes through and does all of the things that she says she's going to do, there's very likely going to be some not insignificant backlash. And we're going to get into a little bit of that further on as we go down the road. And hopefully, this is where I'm going to say later on in the evening, hopefully there's some politicos that tap into the Twitter spaces and maybe offer some further insight for the cabinet, because there's just so much there. But before we move on, there's one thing that I gotta just quickly address, because I think it's really quite important. Last week we were talking about the discrimination piece, and the fact that Danielle Smith made a comment about how she believed that anti-vax folks are the most discriminated people in the history of her lifetime. And so we took a look at one specific demographic group. We took a look at the LGBTQ2S plus community, and we sort of ran through how it really doesn't compare. And we got a correction. And I love this. This just makes my heart so happy in so many different ways, because I learned something new, which is fantastic. And also it was a real compliment just to have the person who issued the correction issue the correction. On that episode, we said that the first same-sex marriage in Alberta occurred in 2007. Now, we talked about the fact that that happened despite of what Alberta had done, because Alberta actually went so far under Klein to invoke the notwithstanding clause to try to prevent same-sex couples from getting married. So we talked about the fact that the first adoption happened, we said incorrectly, in 2007. It's so awesome that one of the people who listened to that episode was actually one of the parents from the first same-sex adoption in Alberta, and they corrected us and they said, you know, it was 2006. And it was quite a fun little exchange because they said 2006, and we were like, okay, yeah, well, we didn't include stepchildren. We were just talking like straight up adoption. And they said, no, I know. Here's how, which was fantastic. And it highlights two things. First of all, I just want to say that it's so awesome that person listens to the show, because it means that we're not doing things horribly, horribly wrong. But the other thing is we're absolutely open to being corrected. If we say something that's demonstrably false on the show, we absolutely want to know about it. So I just wanted to throw that out to the ether before we move on to our, I don't know, I feel like it's going to be an ongoing segment. Danielle Smith Says Things. So Danielle Smith this week, she said some things. And it's hard to believe that all of this happened over the course of just the last week, but this is literally what it was. So we're going to talk about some of the things that Danielle Smith said, and we're not doing this to exploit them, but it's really important to realize these are things that the Premier of Alberta has said recently. We're not going back all the way back to the smoking prevents 75% of disease days. We're not going back to the tainted meat stuff. We're staying within the last year when we're talking about the things that people have been really upset about. And all of this started up in particular when some very intrepid real journalists went through some of Danielle Smith's old social media. Now, a little bit of background is going to be important to understand what's going on with this. There's a platform called Locals, and on that platform, it's basically a subscribe, and you can be part of that person's social media on that site. You have to pay in order to access all of the things. Some of the things you can see without a paid membership. Some of the things you need a paid membership for. Well, a couple of journalists decided that they were going to get the paid memberships, and they found some things. And one of the things that got people really upset was this video where Smith is talking about the Ukraine.
What are your thoughts about the peace plan for Ukraine, Russia? No one seems to be pushing. Is this the older one where Ukraine said that they would be neutral and also denuclearize? Because that should have been the answer right from the beginning. If I'm missing something and there's some new plan, let me know. It would be absurd, if you want to try to draw a parallel, it would be absurd for Canada to have nuclear weapons and be allied with Russia and not think that that was going to upset America. So why would we be surprised if Russia is upset because Ukraine has nuclear weapons and is allied with the United States? So I think the only answer for Ukraine is neutrality. And there's been thriving nations who have managed with neutrality, Switzerland being the most obvious example.
Now, there's a lot to unpack on that clip, but let's start with the fact when it was put out. So that was put out on April 29th. This is not old history. This is just a couple months ago. And it's well into Danielle Smith's leadership campaign, because it's worth remembering as a date that will probably forever go down in ironic infamy. Danielle Smith launched her leadership campaign on April 1st. So that clip got out. A lot of people got very justifiably upset because there's some, not only does it grossly misrepresent the reality of the situation, but there's some simply very basic facts that are wrong, starting with the fact that Ukraine doesn't have nuclear weapons. They haven't since the 90s. Now, this is one of those areas where, you know, if you're being I'm going to say entertainer, because I'm going to come back to that later, but if you're being an entertainer, if you're being a pundit, and you're speculating on things, maybe there's a little bit of latitude. You should probably still get your facts, by and large, correct when you're going with things that are as controversial and as historic, quite frankly, as the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But as somebody who's running for a leadership race, there should be some space for the answer to be, you know what? I'm not super familiar with that situation. I don't want to speculate. So let me get back to you with an answer. Pretty straightforward answer, but that's not what Smith went with. Smith went with, you know, the Ukraine should have been neutral and they've got nukes. They don't have nukes. And I don't know how one is neutral in the face of I don't know, invasion. But there were a lot of people who were really upset about it. Danielle Smith went through a little bit of an evolution in her response. She started off with this tweet right here, where she said, "Oh, the NDP, they're trying to make me look bad with this thing that I said recently." And she tried to spin it into it was just an unfounded partisan attack. Then she continued to defy the calls for apology, which weren't just coming from the NDP. They were coming from Alberta's and globally. It turned into a global news story, but it was also coming from Alberta's sizable Ukrainian population. And really anybody who has any kind of compassion or common sense or basic knowledge of modern history. But there were a lot of people who were calling for the apology that weren't just the NDP. Danielle Smith refused. She said, you just need to move on. You need to get over it. It's not that big of a deal. Right up until she did finally issue an apology. But even that apology had more lies in it. Her apology phrased the situation was like, this was before my leadership campaign. Sometimes you just say things. April 29th comes after April 1st on most calendars that we've checked. Now, as we established earlier on with our error on when same-sex couples were adopting kids in Alberta, maybe we got the dates wrong, but on most calendars that we've referred to, the 29th comes after the 1st. But this was just the start of the week, and it prompted a boatload of people to sort of start exploring the many, many rabbit holes of things that Smith has said. And there were a lot of problems. One of the things that they found was that while she was writing about the potential of global currency, one of the sources that she was using was an anti-Semitic blog. Now, from what we can see, it doesn't appear that she's said anything profoundly anti-Semitic in those writings. But when you're using a anti-Semitic blog as your source material and saying, hey, if you have questions, you should refer to this, you're driving people to that website, which is not okay. Independent investigative journalist Justin Ling went down the rabbit hole even farther. He published an amazing article that goes through more things that we're going to talk about, but it had a stunning list of false information that Smith has shared, COVID denialism, basic medical untruths, and a whole lot more. And she kept going throughout the week. She kept going with these bizarre statements and these bizarre promises. She was at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce on October 20th, and this is what she had to say to the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce.
So one of the things that we'll be coming through with in the fall as well is a change to the Human Rights Code to make it illegal to discriminate against anyone on the basis of their COVID vaccination status. Now, I recognize that there are still some organizations and some businesses in Alberta that is doing that, and I just want to sort of give you fair warning that we are going to be making a serious pivot in that regard. And I would just ask if you would work with us to align your policies with the direction that we want to go in Alberta, because we want to send a message to the community and to the world community and to the investment markets that this is a place that is open for business, that this is a place that believes in freedom, this is a place that believes in free enterprise, and this is a place where we're not going to be making arbitrary decisions that are going to disproportionately impact the small and medium businesses in this province.
Now, there's a whole lot to unpack in that clip. First of all, some of the best legal minds in Alberta have already said, wait, you're going to make only one vaccine a protected human right? There's a lot of problems there. Because there are a lot of professions, especially healthcare, that do require vaccination for certain things. And our entire legal system works on the idea of precedent. So if you say, well, this one vaccine is going to be legally protected, you can't discriminate somebody if they do or do not have that vaccine. First of all, you're forcing people to disclose whether or not they have that vaccine. But more to the point, you're now presenting a legal argument that says, maybe vaccination should be a protected human right. Now, the courts have already ruled that's not the case. That's already been done. But even trying to pursue this with just a single vaccine as opposed to all vaccines is incredibly legally problematic and illogical. It's not going to work. It's going to be challenged like crazy. And it's going to waste a lot of taxpayers' money in regards to pursuing those legal challenges. Again, Danielle Smith likes to say things that aren't based on research. They aren't based on available facts. They aren't based on available information. They're based on what she wants to say in the moment. And this weekend at the UCP AGM, I'm going to jump around for just a little second here. This weekend at the UCP AGM, she tried to justify that. And the way that she tried to justify it was by saying, I recognize when I'm in an entertainment role as a talk radio host or as a columnist, there's a different job to do. The job is to be provocative, to get people talking, to get clicks, and to get advertising. Well, let's just be clear about a couple of things here right out of the gates. First of all, that's not being an entertainer. That's being a sellout. There's a big difference. And if you are presenting yourself, even in an entertainment construct, as providing information or conversations that people believe or have reason to believe are based on, I don't know, reality, there is a certain moral and ethical responsibility to at least try to get it more right than wrong. Nobody's going to get it right 100% of the time. But if you're just saying, all that matters is if people are getting clicks and if we're getting advertising, that's how I lived my whole life, then a lot of things about how Danielle Smith conducts herself start to make a whole lot of sense. But unfortunately, as much as Smith wants to try to say, oh, you know what, guys, that was me in a previous life. I don't talk like that when I'm in government. Government's a different beast entirely. On Friday, there were a lot of people who actually thought that she was going to make her cabinet announcement on this new show that she's doing on the Western Standard, which again carries a whole bunch of moral and ethical questions because she used to be a paid employee of the Western Standard. She used to have a show on the Western Standard, and now she's using her platform as premier to provide the Western Standard another exclusive show that they're going to be able to do reportedly on a weekly basis. I mean, on the episode that they did, Derek Fildebrandt was talking about how they're going to have call-in lines, and they've had a couple people in caucus say, you know what, this is going to be such a great opportunity for people to get to interact with the premier in ways that they normally wouldn't be able to. And you can't help but wonder, is the Western Standard going to make any money off of this at all? The answer is probably yes. So it raises some very interesting questions. But the biggest questions come with some of the things that Smith had to say. Now, we're not going to make you listen to the whole thing. We did that for you. But we do have a couple of highlights that we want to hook you up with.
During the leadership race, actually during the debate we had of the front runners, you said you would, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
I'll tell you what I did say, because initially I had been told that there was an appetite to open those ridings again. Since in my opening meeting with the executive, they said there really isn't an avenue for the leader to do that any decision on revisiting would have to be made by the board.
You said that you're not going to be taking advice further from Dina Hinshaw, Chief Medical Officer of the province. But I read it as somewhat of an ambiguous statement. Maybe you can clarify it. Is she going to be relieved of her position? Is she going to be removed from the position, or is she just more or less being phased out from the decision-making process?
I'm going to be working with my health minister on that. We'll make a joint decision. Just announced that we are going to end all of the sale of firearms or for handguns.
He thinks.
He thinks. So I asked the minister if he would put out a statement on that. So I know that he's up for a big fight on that. But these are really important issues because they go to our different cultural values in Alberta. We are a different culture here.
Now, again, whole lot to unpack there. But one of the big themes there is Danielle Smith campaigned on a bunch of issues, and she overpromised and is clearly going to underdeliver to her base, and for many people this might be a mercy, on a lot of those things. Danielle Smith campaigned heavily on the fact that she was going to, as the new premier and as the leader of the UCP, she was going to reopen nominations for people who had their nomination rejected by the UCP, ironically enough, for problematic social media content. Huh. One can't help but wonder where that vetting process went for the leadership race. But that was a big talking point for her. She said that it was incredibly unjust. People shouldn't have been disqualified. And she has spent the last couple of days walking that back, saying, well, I don't actually have the power to do that. It's up to the board. Later on in the interview with the Western Standard, one of the things she said was, people don't want the leader meddling. There's been too much of that. So I don't think it's really my place to meddle. We'll have to see what happens, I guess. Danielle Smith campaigned heavily on the idea that she was going to fire Dr. Henshaw. Now, Dr. Deena Henshaw is let's go with polarizing figure in Alberta politics and in healthcare. There's a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum who take a pretty big issue with how she conducted herself throughout the pandemic, how she exercised her legal powers, how she didn't exercise her legal powers, all of those sorts of things. So it's not a very simple conversation, is Deena Henshaw good or bad? It's not that simple. But Danielle Smith campaigned on, I'm going to fire her. Day one, going to be one of the first things that I do. I'm going to fire her. And right there, she's already starting to walk that back. But the most shocking part of all of those clips, and certainly the one that's gotten the most traction and the most interest from and generated the most conversation at least on our social media, for whatever that's worth, has to do with, the feds are saying you can't buy or sell or transfer ownership of handguns anymore. And the implication that handguns are somehow a intrinsic part of Alberta's culture. It has been overwhelming how many people have been saying, I live in rural Alberta. I grew up in rural Alberta. There's lots of ranchers out here who have long guns or shotguns, and they are tools of the trade. You need them. Only time I've ever seen a handgun has been when an RCMP person is carrying it or when a police officer is carrying it. The reality is handgun ownership is so heavily restricted to begin with. There's really only a couple of reasons for anyone to own a handgun in A, Alberta, B, Canada. One of them is for target shooting or sport shooting or for law enforcement, and the other one is to kill people. That's really all it is. Nobody uses handguns for hunting. Handguns are not known within the shooting community as the tool with which you're going to use to reach out and touch something. That's not what handguns are used for. Hunters who take their trade seriously, who take harvesting animals seriously, don't want to mess around with small caliber weapons that aren't anywhere near as accurate because it's going to cause the animal more suffering. That's not what real hunters are about. There is no culture in Alberta around handgun ownership or handgun usage. That is not a part of the defining culture of Alberta, but that apparently seems to be a big part of the culture of Alberta that Danielle Smith believes is critically important. Now, one of the other things that Danielle Smith spent a lot of time talking about over the last couple of days has been a program called Our Star. And it's a complicated little thing, but the basic premise that we've been able to suss out is it's well established that Alberta has a tremendous problem with orphan wells. There's some Dragon's Den folks you could probably ask about that too. But there's a tremendous problem in Alberta with orphan wells. For anyone who isn't familiar, orphan wells are when an oil company or a gas company goes and creates a well site on some chunk of land and then goes, we're bankrupt. Sorry, we're going to go over here now. And they leave that well what's called unremediated, which means the well is still a dangerous site. The land around the well is potentially contaminated. It turns into a whole big thing. But it's a big problem. And the federal government just gave a boatload of cash to Alberta a little while ago to try to deal with that problem. And fundamentally, what it comes down to is oil companies and gas companies reneging on the commitments that they've made to Albertans for the privilege of getting oil and gas out of the ground. That's the bottom line. They're not holding up their end of the bargain. Now, this is something they should be held accountable for, but in a bizarre way, the R-Star program, and if there's anybody who's able to explain this a little bit better later on in the open mic section, would love to be told how wrong I am about this, because the way that it looks to me is really quite bad. The way that the R-Star program is it says, you know what? If you do your job, if you remediate the well site the way that you promised to, the way that you're contractually obligated to, if you do the bare minimum, we'll give you a bonus. Which says something about how low the expectations are. Because if we have to, in effect, bribe oil companies to remediate the land that they used to get oil and gas out of, we have far bigger problems at hand. But where it starts to get interesting is when you start to take a look at where did this idea come from. It gets pretty complex pretty quick. But the one thing that we want to talk about tonight is where it came from. So the R-Star program is apparently a brainchild of, we'll call it an organization called Sustaining Alberta's Energy Network. Now, on their website, there's only one person listed on the executive. That's a gentleman named Chris Kinnear. Now, this is somebody that Smith has referred to as being a very important person in regards to the R-Star program. He's the one who came up with it. He came up with it because his land wasn't properly remediated. He's very unhappy about that. We got to do something about it. Now, if it was just that, you might not have any questions. We always have questions here. So we did some Googling. And it turns out Chris Kinnear is either a very common name, or it's the same dude who just finished working on Danielle Smith's leadership campaign for the last 6 months. Because on his LinkedIn, he's described as the campaign coordinator for the Danielle Smith leadership campaign, contract full-time. Now, his job description's a little vague. It's just helping with Danielle Smith's leadership campaign. But the title campaign coordinator carries some weight. So it is a little bizarre that somebody who was apparently a contracted employee of the Danielle Smith leadership campaign is now getting a program that they, by and large, seem to have exclusively developed. And one, by the way, that was pitched to the current government in 2020, and they didn't seem a whole lot interested in it because it's just a way of throwing away more money. Who'd have thunk they got that one right? But they didn't seem very interested in it at the time. So we're going to be spending a little bit more time looking into this whole R-Star thing because it looks like it's just another way to funnel money to oil and gas companies for, again, doing the bare minimum. It's a tipping program. One of the other big stories that got a lot of attention this week was the resignation of an AHS board member. Now, this is another one of the areas that Danielle Smith campaigned very, very heavily on. And in fact, the reason why she resigned is specifically because of the rhetoric that Danielle Smith has been using around AHS. So the story broke a couple of days ago, and the big quote that came from the CBC, they got a hold of the resignation letter. And what the resignation letter said, the particular section that was highlighted in the CBC article was, quote, "I fear that the Premier-elect's proposals will further destabilize the workplace environment for all healthcare workers, adding more uncertainty when frontline staff and those who work tirelessly to lead and assist them require support and thoughtful oversight." So that's the letter that this board member wrote, and it was actually dated the day that the UCP voted in their new leader, Danielle Smith. Now things get even more interesting because Danielle Smith has gone on quite a bit about how, it's all the NDP. She doubled down on that at the UCP leadership convention this weekend, where she talked about, all of these people are holdovers from the NDP government. It's all just the NDP. And they've got all of these ideological people who are involved. And so we decided to take a look at who the board members were for AHS. So for those of you that are on the Twitter Spaces, it's a bit of a visual thing here. But we pulled up the public board meeting with notes from April 25th, 2019, right before the big transition of government that happened. And you can see very clearly all of the names of all of the people who were involved. Now, at this point, the NDP wouldn't have had the ability to put anyone else on the board. When you take a look at the most recent, from September 12th, 2022, there's no names left there. All of the board members aren't the same as the ones that were appointed. Pretty much every single board member that is currently sitting on the AHS board that haven't resigned because of Danielle Smith, I guess I should say, pretty much every single board member was appointed by, drumroll please, the UCP government. In that article as well, one of those UCP appointees, Stephen Mandel, ex-leader of the Alberta Party, he was appointed shortly after the 2019 election. He even said, you know what? We don't have any control over the day-to-day stuffs. That's not what a governance board does. And this is another place where it gets really important to understand that there's different types of boards. Fundamentally, the two big types of boards that oversee organizations are governance boards and operational boards. Governance boards are the ones who say, here's the rules, here's what the goals are, here's how we're going to do things, guys. But they don't get involved in the day-to-day. Operational boards do. But operational boards don't tend to be the kinds of boards that are overseeing companies that have hundreds of thousands of employees. That's what effective management is for. So again, it's another way that Danielle Smith has decided to really misrepresent incredibly complex issues to the people that are supporting her, when the one thing that should really be called for is a little bit of nuance, a little bit of detail, maybe a little bit of saying, hey, you know what? Healthcare's been neglected for decades. Klein blew up hospitals. We've had a problem that we have let go, by and large, unaddressed, and it's going to take a long time to get us out of that hole. I'm not going to fire the entire AHS board and appoint a commissioner because I'm bitter about the fact that once upon a time I was a school board trustee and we did such a bad job they did that to us because it was a toxic work environment. I haven't seen any reports of any allegations of the AHS board having a toxic work environment, but that's how she's trying to present it. So it really kind of forces the question, how much of this is personal grudge and how much of this is an actual desire to fix the healthcare system? Because when you have board members quitting as soon as you're elected because you've got everything wrong in everything that you've said so far, that really does kind of force some pretty big questions. Now, one of the other things that we wanted to talk about real quick before we get into the Twitter Spaces and the town hall. So if anybody's watching the YouTube, if you wanna throw some comments up there, or if you have some verbal comments that you want to share, then hop on the Twitter Spaces and we'd be happy to hear your thoughts. But we did things a little bit differently last week, where we had a segment where we had an AISH advocate on named Don Slater. And Don's been on the show a couple times now. He is an incredibly inspirational human being. He, despite having a situation that has put him on AISH, and despite having stage 4 cancer, Don continues to advocate pretty much unrelentlessly for the disability community. Well, Don gave us an update after last week's episode aired. And what Don shared was, since this podcast was made, Danielle Smith's promise to re-index AISH because it is the right thing to do has been converted to a comment from her office stating that the re-indexing question would be sent to CSS, which is Community and Social Services, for consideration. Now, this is a budget issue. CSS cannot re-index AISH. Dunn says, I feel like I was blown off. Going from a promise to a state of consideration is also called not a promise. And Dawn is absolutely right. All of the leadership candidates were asked in the run-up to the vote, what are you going to do about AISH? AISH, by the way, is assisted income for the severely handicapped. I probably should have said that earlier. All of them were asked. All of them, without any sort of equivocation, said, you know what? We need to re-index it. We did a big thing badly when we de-indexed it. We need to re-index it. We need to take care of people. Super important. It's worth noting, all of the leadership candidates, except for one, are in Smith's cabinet. There has been no conversation, public at least, about re-indexing AISH. And as you can see from what Don was given as a response, they're already trying to dial it back. Now, if Danielle Smith wants to not fire Henshaw, that's a political consideration. Whatever. If Danielle Smith wants to renege or evolve her standpoint on the Alberta Sovereignty Act, first of all, that's great. But of all of the promises that Danielle Smith made, that she should not screw up, there shouldn't be any question that indexing AISH to inflation should absolutely be the one. People are living under the poverty line in Alberta because, yet again, there's a provincial government that can't make them a priority. And that's an embarrassment to all of us. Now, a couple other things we're going to talk about real quick. The Brooks by-election is going on, and there's some interesting information coming out of there. We've heard some things. There's been some polling, some real polling, not just the internet polling, and it sounds like Danielle Smith's in a pretty confident position to win it. I know that's not what anybody wants to hear. There's a lot of people who have said, there'd be nothing better than Danielle Smith getting trounced. But it seems like the rest of the political spectrum still has some learning to do from the experiment that is the UCP. Because the UCP United, the whole reason was to not split the vote. They didn't want to have too many people voting for too many conservative options. Well, looks like in Brooks, one of the very real possibilities is that there's enough people, from what we hear, Barry Morishita, who's going to be on an episode that we're going to be dropping in a couple of days. Barry Morishita is in a strong second place, but it sounds like the NDP are also in a reasonable third place. And so when you combine those two vote chunks enough, Danielle Smith's going to walk away with enough of the conservative vote. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how that poll evolves, because that poll was done before the very, very bad week that Danielle Smith just had, where she alienated the Ukrainian population in Alberta and did a bunch of other really horrible things. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Want to talk really quick about a couple of things that we're going to be chasing down over the next week. We're going to be taking a pause for the next 2 weeks on our interview episodes because we want to talk about True North. They are Danielle Smith's number one favorite. Well, maybe competing with the Western Standard. It's like close second. But True North is very clearly Danielle Smith's media outlet of choice. And we went down the True North rabbit hole just a little bit a couple of days ago. And some of the things that we found made us go, wow, that's going to be a whole episode. So we need to spend a little bit of time on that. So we're going to be taking a really close look at True North. We're going to be putting together a whole episode on that in the coming weeks. So look forward to that, because we already know that we're going to have some really good fun with that one. But the other thing that we want to talk about is an organization called Take Back Alberta. Take Back Alberta is a third-party advertiser PAC that did a lot of organizing in the run-up to the UCP leadership race. And in fact, there's a lot of people who are crediting them with getting a lot of people signed up for UCP memberships and getting Danielle Smith elected. Well, Take Back Alberta put forward a bunch of preferred candidates for the UCP board elections that happened over the weekend, and 9 of their preferred candidates were elected. Now, I'm going to talk to Deirdre about this in just a couple of minutes, because it's to me, it represents a fairly seismic shift in what the UCP was trying to be versus what it has become, what it's going to continue to become. And it's going to be fascinating to see how, and terrifying for the record, to see how that unfolds. But it's really important to understand that when we're talking about Take Back Alberta, we're talking about some people who are very, very, very deeply involved in politics. And rather than just try to do a throwaway 3 or 4 minute bit on that, we're going to do a whole episode on who is Take Back Alberta, what's their history, because make no mistake, they are playing a major role in defining the shape of our province for the next little while. So, all of that being said, Deirdre, I'm gonna hope that you're listening and that you're unmuting.
I'm here.
Mic. There you go. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. How was the drive back from Edmonton?
You guys got snow.
We did. It's beginning
We
to
did
look
not
a lot
get that
like
in Edmonton.
the week before Halloween in Calgary. Anyways, it always snows before Halloween in Calgary. I don't know why everybody's surprised.
Right. It wasn't bad though. It was no, the drive was fine. I had a big weekend, but I also had, like, I did 2 Thanksgivings in a row, which I hosted both times. And so on Friday when I got to the convention, it was kind of, quick, do the things that I had to do. And I skipped out on the hospitality suites because I was exhausted, and they didn't have any Saturday.
Well, all
So
the voting was
that was
done.
unfortunate.
all the big stuff was done, so they don't need to curry favor after that point.
Right? But it was, the convention itself was good, was interesting. So, of course, there's, like, we know that there's some disruption within caucus, right? Within the party itself, that there seems to be more splitting, and that was really evident at the convention, like with the voting. More than one was like super close, very, very 50-50 kind of looking votes. And those were on some contentious ones.
That seems to be their brand now. Let's get it as close to 50% as we possibly can.
Right. That's the whole thing. But there were a couple of surprises, right? The where is it here? The don't teach about racial inequality type thing, that was defeated. And that was one of the really close votes. And talking with actually Derek Hildebrand, I was standing with him at the time, and he was pointing out in one of the resolutions, he's like, membership is supposed to create kind of guidance, right? Not actually write legislation. And another one that didn't pass was one that said, more doctors, less bureaucrats, reduce the pay of bureaucrats, and increase funding for preventative health. One of the reasons, like, he looked at it and he said the reason that this doesn't go anywhere is because they were actually trying to dictate legislation. So legislation that said reduce the number of public servants within AHS who are making more than 140,000 from 900 down to 200. Like, that's super, super specific. And I know we've had this conversation before about policy where, something like more doctors, less bureaucrats. Hey, that's pretty generalized. Who doesn't want that, especially in Alberta when we are seeing a shortage of doctors, right? They're generally what good policy can be is something that provides some guidance. Your membership wants to ensure that we all have doctors, right? That's pretty easy. And it's something that usually, no matter where your political ideological leanings may lie, you can generally get behind them. But some of that really specific stuff, it's an attempt by the membership to actually write legislation, and that's not the membership's job. So it was a quick one too. They only had 20 resolutions that made it to the floor. And if you've paid attention to any of the UCP AGMs, like the first year, I think there was like 100 resolutions, and there was no way to get through them. So
Well, that's probably why they dialed it down. But like, here's the two things that I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on, because it seems like that there's a bit of a disconnect. So first one is, there's a difference between policy, which then informs platform, which then
right.
informs legislation. So just because something is a UCP policy doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to become legislation. Now, Mr. Kenney did do an tragically impressive job of making sure that a lot of their platform did happen. But
Right.
more often than not, it seems like policy is something that's used to sort of fire up the base. And that gets to my next question, because you know where I'm going. I'm not happy about this, Deirdre. This is because here's my thing. As somebody who's written policy for provincial parties, I've done that. Generally
So have I.
speaking, exactly. Like we're policy wonks, no big deal. But generally speaking, you're trying to address a problem that you perceive. You
Right.
use the example of, we need more doctors. So you're generally trying to say, you know what, we've got this problem, we should probably solve it. There's one policy I have not been able to trace the problem of, and it's the hateful one. I feel like that's an accurate description. I'm going to stick to it. That
But
says,
can you be more specific?
the fact that I have to, which hateful policy are we talking about today? That's pretty telling in and of itself. But I'm talking about the policy that goes after, it seems like the UCP just really, really hate LGBTQ2S plus kids. They've got a real problem with the notion that LGBTQ2S plus kids should be allowed to be a thing. And they put their policy forward that talked about the notion that parents shouldn't be forced to use any sort of gender affirming language with their kids. Now, there's two pieces here that I'm just going to get out, and then I want to hear what the reaction was like at the convention, because that's one of the ones that passed. Nobody's forcing anyone to do that. There are no laws. There are no rules. There's no like pronoun police that hang out in the living rooms of Albertans' houses, and if you didn't use your child's preferred pronoun, they say, that's not a thing. There's nothing that says, well, there are some boundaries, but when it comes to any sort of gender affirming stuff, there's nothing that says, hey, maybe don't be a shitty parent on this one.
Right.
But they put forth this policy that says, you know what, we're going to protect people's ability to be, I don't know, shitty parents or something. And it got voted in. What did that look like? Like, I want to know how that got to, how did they say, you know what, the racism in schools, that's a little bit too contentious. Maybe we don't want to alienate our base. But when it came to the use of pronouns that nobody's forcing anyone to do, that was a policy that got adopted.
Yeah. So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. The fear mongering from certain publications is that we're all going to be forced to, basically to address people in a way that they want to be addressed, and to call them what they would like to be called. Used to be called civility,
Manners.
just basic decency, manners. Yep. Manners, and now it looked, there was a lot of stuff going on in there with and that was Bill C-16, and so it was debated at the federal level, and essentially what it was saying, it really wasn't so much as applying to individual people, although it may go into discrimination category, right? So or let's say, I don't know if it's a hate crime, but it can be harassment if you refuse to do it. But like, that's where it's really coming from. And so remember that there is a very large group of members in the United Conservative Party who have been pulled in by like Parents for Choice in education, parental rights advocates, just generally people that are really afraid of the government for whatever reason. So that's where this stems from. And, you know, it's in a way, most of these things, they're non-enforceable. Like, they're not enforceable to begin with. So in reaction to something that isn't enforceable, they're going to make something enforceable. It's a, I don't know, it's a feel good policy for a particular group of individuals who are really concerned about governments coming into their home or sending someone into their home that says you have to treat your child with respect, or you have to teach your children that other people exist. But there's also this theory, I'm going to call it a theory, that I don't know, John Oliver did a bit one day about how the instance of people who were left-handed, like, just shot right up, basically right around the time that they stopped forcing kids who were left-handed to use their right. So that's what happened, right? It wasn't that all of a sudden everyone became left-handed. But this is a theory within certain circles that if you don't teach children that, you know, they might not, that the reason they don't feel at home in their own body is because, well, there's an actual reason for that. If you don't teach them that, well, then they will be what and who you want them to be. And it's an unfortunate, like I said, theory that is very popular within certain circles. And within those certain circles, apparently, a lot of them have UCP memberships. So that's how I will explain that.
That was very diplomatic of you.
Thank you.
I still, like, to me, they might have well put forward a policy saying, we're not going to allow somebody to come into your house and watch you eat dinner. Like, it's,
well, basically, yeah.
That's the same level of concern. Like,
yeah,
it
really is. And it's, but again, because I pay attention to, you know, things that, like certain publications that most people would just be like, I'm not reading that, it's crap. Yes, it is. Unfortunately, it informs a whole bunch of people.
It's true. And this is why we're going to be doing a deep dive on True North in the next couple of weeks here, because that's I'm trying to think of the word here that's not going to cause me any problems. A publication. I'm going to steal from you. That's a publication that boy, that rabbit hole goes all over the place. And it's stunning to me. And again, it's one of those things where I resent the holy hell out of the fact that I have to pay attention to them. But regrettably,
tell me about it.
They are Danielle Smith's state media for all intents and purposes. Yeah. And so you kind of have to, if you want to know the horrible things that Danielle Smith is saying, which I think that we need to talk about, because we're sliding into something, you know, more and more dangerous. I just wish that the UCP would stop hating on kids, because it's not a good look.
Yeah. And like, I fully agree with you. It's unfortunate that parents don't maybe understand that it's okay if your child isn't exactly like you, but there are a lot of parents who really struggle with that, right? And that's like, I've got a bit in my newsletter coming out that kind of addresses that as well. Like, the way that that's worded is that, you know, you won't be forced to, where is it here? There we go. That you can't, that you wouldn't be required to affirm or socially condition a child in a gender identity that is incongruent with the child's birth sex. And essentially what they're saying is it's perfectly okay to gender norm and gender stereotype and raise them that way. And again, all of this ignores the fact that, hey, or maybe your kid just wants to be a kid and do their own thing and be their own person. But it's not easy for everybody, right?
The thing that frustrates me the most about it is being trans is a real thing.
Yep.
and it depend for different people. It takes different amounts of time for them to figure out why they are so uncomfortable in their own skin. And when you take a look at the suicide rates among trans youth, it's I'm trying not to swear in case my mom listens to this. It's horrifying.
Mhm.
It really is horrifying. And for any political party to take the stance of, hey, you know what? We don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. So if, can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, a couple of dead trans kids, what are you going to do? That's the message. That's
Yeah,
the
but see,
message that they're sending.
you also have to remember too that these are individuals who believe that there would not be trans children if they weren't told that they could be.
That's
So-
like thinking that a kid isn't going to get diabetes if you don't ever take them for a blood sugar test. And
That's
I want to
right.
be clear. I'm not saying that being
like-
trans is in any way a disease or a condition or anything like that. That's just the first example that came to my mind because I'm annoyed.
Yeah, but and the thing is, like, I mean, I fully agree with you, but our brains work differently than, this is, but it is like, there's a lot of people that believe that if you didn't tell someone that they could be an LGBTQ individual, 2S plus, then they wouldn't be. Like, this is an act, like, people actually believe that the only reason that there are people that are different than them is because they were told it would be okay to be different.
By that logic, though, I mean that razor cuts both ways. So if people didn't know that they could be
You'd
straight,
think.
we'd have a battle. It's
Mm.
just
Mm-hmm.
it makes my head hurt.
And that's the thing, right? Like, I have so I have a close relationship with a person who came out as transgender a couple of years ago now, and but I knew them from the time that they were like 1, and so I had always felt like maybe they just weren't comfortable around my family, like maybe that was the problem. And yet whenever he would talk about it, he would say, how happy he was to visit, and but I never got that feeling while he was here. And once he came out, I was like, I'm like, that makes so much sense now. I'm like, because you were so uncomfortable, and I figured it was just around us. And he was like, no, it was just all the time. That's how I felt all the time. And until you've actually, like, I mean, I didn't have a problem with, trans people to begin with, but that was an understanding that I definitely didn't have beforehand. And the way that I've explained it to, my kids, because we started having this conversation in 2018, I think. And the way that I explained it to them was, I said, you feel comfortable in your body, but what if you were you, but you were a girl or a boy, or had, like, what if that was your outside? How would that feel for you? And, it's just, and they kind of understood that in a way, but again, like, this is, we're talking about people taking extra levels of trying to bring that understanding to someone else. And if you don't have it to begin with, then how can you? It's just all foreign to you, and it doesn't make any sense, and you would just rather not deal with it. And who doesn't know a parent that hasn't just taken that road?
I guess for me,
So-
the fundamental problem that I have when people get like all squirrely about LGBTQ 2+ issues is why does your opinion matter? Like, unless you're
Right?
convinced that everybody who is LGBTQ 2+ is like a sexual predator, which isn't true, unless you're operating on that assumption, all of that stuff doesn't affect you. And I mean, like, I'm going to speak.
Oh, but it affects society. It affects society
No,
as
it
a
doesn't.
whole.
It
Society
doesn't.
is going down the hill. I know it's not. I'm just saying that is the belief. That is the belief within these certain circles. And it's an interesting place to be within those circles. I was around them in Medicine Hat during the original GSA challenge. And it was like the courtroom was full. They were milling about outside. I stood around and I listened to the conversations. And it's a bunch of very scared people who think that society is going to hell in a handbasket. And it's because things are different that they understand.
See,
and
this,
yeah.
I the anecdote that I'll share, because I think it sums it up so much better, is, at least from my what I'm trying to verbalize without swearing a whole bunch, is my kid's godparent is trans, and my kids knew him before he transitioned, and
Okay.
when he wasn't he externally yet, my kids love to play Pokemon with this person, and when he figured out what he needed to figure out, my kids still love to play Pokemon with him. So like, everybody needs to just be decent human beings.
Chill out, right?
It just makes me so angry. I'm going to change the topic here because I'll keep going on this all night long. We have a couple of hands up in the air that I want to address, and I see a couple of names in the thinger tonight, so I just want to say this as well, real quick, on the off chance that they might hear it, because I think it's super important. I spend a lot of time dumping on True North. I spend a lot of time dumping on the Rebel, and I do that because in the same way that nobody at the breakdown is like, we're not journalists. It's in the bios. It's in all of the bios. And it's in the bios for a very deliberate reason, because the practice of journalism, real journalism, is critically important to a healthy democracy. And it drives me absolutely crazy that there are people out there who are representing themselves as journalists when they are not, by any reasonable standard, practicing what I would call journalism. And we've seen a couple of announcements this week of people who are leaving the journalism realm in Alberta politics, and it's absolutely heartbreaking to me, because these are some really, really important voices. So I just want to say to all of the real journalists out there, not the pundits and the hacks like us, or like me, at least, for sure. I don't want to be dissing you.
I was just gonna say.
Sorry, I'm trying to like work on a preamble here. That, you know, there's so much vitriol that gets directed at journalists right now. The reality is that there are journalists who have had to remove the decals from their vehicles because people somehow think that it's acceptable to go up to them and threaten them, especially women journalists. I can't imagine what women journalists have to deal with. We see videos pop up every once in a while of somebody who thinks that they're being funny when they're not. So I just want to say huge props to everybody out there who's doing real journalism, because you keep democracy alive, and thank you for that. Moving on from there, though, we got Sarah Biggs, who is in the house. Sarah, I'm going to talk slowly.
Hi.
There we go. I'm trying this new thing where I like really try to extend the introduction so that people have time to get to the mic button. How's it going?
Oh, why did you say the R word and the T word? I'm gonna have nightmares tonight. I was doing well. I didn't have to deal with those guys for the past 2 weeks.
Oh. I was like, the R word and the T word. Because like everybody's
the Rebel
speaking
and
in
the
letters
True
these
North.
days. Danielle Smith did her whole, as long as you don't use these letters, then you're allowed to be on my Twitter. We're still blocked. We've never used any of those words.
Yeah, I'm not blocked
there's
yet.
An R
I
and
was
a T now
unblocked.
too. Like, what's going on?
Oh, you know, just taking time off. It's actually okay. I'm not upset at taking time off, and you know, right now, not being called to go and serve the Premier office is quite the badge of honor. Let me tell you, it's been interesting.
So here's what my thing is, Sarah. I mean, I'm gonna wade into some potentially sensitive waters. I apologize if I'm stepping on toes. And
no, that's okay. I'm a free agent
now. You can always
now.
tell
We're
me
good.
to pound sand. So, what do you make of Cabinet?
So I heard. Cabinet. cabinet.
Biggest cabinet in Alberta's recent history, and there was one very prominent name that wasn't on that list, and it has prompted a lot of speculation. And I'm not going to ask you to speak for anything other than what are your thoughts?
I'm not going to be able to, talk about Leela's decision-making process and what's going to
for sure
go on with Leela, because, with Bruce McAllister's announcements last week, saying that he was now the executive director of Southern Alberta for the Premier's office and fully endorsing Chantal Delange, very average, couldn't say the least. It's interesting. A lot of people, how to keep your caucus together with red tape and raises and appointments. We're talking about 38 senior and junior cabinet minister altogether. 38. That is not very fiscal conservative, my friend. But hey, we gotta go, AHS is too top heavy. We need to go after them because priorities. Yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent point. I can't believe I missed that one. Well done.
It's, a lot of people drank the Kool-Aid and a lot of people drank the windshield fluid washer too. It's just fascinating to see Madhu as deputy premier. Absolutely fascinating. He barely won his riding at his last nomination.
Does the deputy premier get to have the Edmonton chief of police on speed dial? Is that a thing, or is that limited only to that?
I don't know. I can ask him though if you want. But what's interesting to see is that some of the key positions like Taves, Shandro, Minister Copping, those positions are
LaGrange.
Yeah, LaGrange. I forgot about Mrs. LaGrange. I tend to forget about her. But what I'm trying to say is that I see that as a cabinet of transition until her people get in.
Well, it seems to be that, she's even alluded to that herself in saying that this is going to be a short, like my reaction, to be entirely honest, to the cabinet announcements and all of the parliamentary secretary, associate minister, let's just give all of the names. That to me looks a lot like, hey, you know what? You get a pay bump. And you get a pay bump, and you were a good poodle too,
and
so
everybody
you get
gets
a pay bump.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take the people out of I don't want to put any of my people into the super controversial ministries because they're coming for you.
Hell's gonna break loose.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're coming for your seat.
Yeah.
She did say she was going to reopen some nominations, so we're expecting big names to go.
But she said she can't.
I'd like to salute Jason Nixon today. But, it's quite interesting. How could I say? It's quite interesting because some of those appointments were life, career, kiss of death kind of appointments. Because, when you texted me about the appointments on Friday, with all honesty, I was having a nap. I was like, I don't know, don't care, don't want to see it. I was like, oh, what is going on? I was like, oh, shoot. But, McIver's on the back bench. Godfrey's on the back bench. Miss Ahir is going to be on the back bench. Some very household names are being backbench. And, I'm trying to understand some of the logic in the appointments here. How big of cabinets Ms. Shawnee got, how big, Travis back in finance kind of makes sense. We're going to see, it's going to be interesting. I wish I could be a fly on the wall during cabinet meetings because I'm hearing that not all ministers are happy. Well, and not all are saying that the caucus is united and it's holding with red tape.
The only
So,
people who would be able to fit into the cabinet meetings would have to be a fly on the wall because they're so packed.
oh, they're gonna have to buy more chairs.
But
But
here's what I wanted to get both yours and Deirdre's perspective on, because there are two ministries that are less of a thing. Certainly one's been eliminated, and the other one is like, well, maybe we'll think about it on Tuesdays. But there's no more Ministry of Labor. That's not a thing anymore.
no,
And
that's gone.
The status of women as a ministerial level is not a thing either. It's a parliamentary secretary thing. I'm gonna ask you to go first, Sarah. What's your take on those things?
It's extremely unfortunate. How many female ministers do we have here?
4.
I believe we have 5 women in cabinet.
Is it 5? I thought it only.
How
4.
insane is that?
You're gonna make me go down the list.
It's 5.
There's Savage, Schultz,
7.
Sawney, LaGrange.
Well, parliamentary secretaries as well.
Yeah,
Well, you're counting those ones too. I was talking like big kid cabinet.
it's 5.
Yeah.
In big kid?
There's 5.
Did you just say big K?
No, big kid.
Oh,
Big kid.
okay.
The big
Right.
kids table. There's
At the
the big
big
kids
kid
table.
table.
There's the little kids table.
So I'm wondering how, with how, to all the men's and all the Brett Wilson out there and are saying that, they don't feel like women should be needing a status of women ministry. I would say, please get out of your house and go to a few female entrepreneurs. B, it's going to be interesting to see. So we need to take it under a few lenses. A, how will this impact not having a minister of status of women? Would it impact women's health care on the EHS level? That's number 1. Number 2, how will this change within the system of education? Are they going to go back to a more traditional kind of muddling, if you want? That's going to be extremely interesting to see. Also, well, Minister of Labor is gone now, so I guess it's going to go to kind of post ed on how they're going to be furthering, women's in STEM or, women's in construction, or it's going to be interesting to see on every level of government and a lot of ministries how women's place will be taking their space. How will all the ladies in the province will be like, hey, we're here. And I'm worried that a lot of programs will be falling off the radar. I'm worried about the YWCA. I'm worried about some shelters. I'm worried about a lot of things right now. Because losing the Minister of Status of Women is one thing, but color me surprised to tell me that I'm wrong, that I'm somewhat worried about what could happen to the women in the province, to all the programs, all the support, the abortion clinics. Daniel Smith's like, they're kind of carrying a Jesus, guns, and babies message right now. But technically, Daniel Smith is pro-choice. So it's going to be interesting to see what's happening in there. And labor. I don't even know what to say about that. It's who's going to be amending the labor code? Who's going to be taking meetings with the Federation of Labor? Who's going to be helping negotiating agreements with? I can't even name the damage.
Negotiations for the week, Sarah. There will be no negotiations. There will be Sovereignty Act every time you want to negotiate. Sovereignty Act. No negotiation because we're going to be sovereign and junk. It's it's Deirdre.
I'm concerned.
Are you comfortable? I guess women have won. You're all good now. How are you feeling?
Well, one of the things that, I actually looked at the cabinet appointments. Yes, it's huge. It is huge, but I actually think I think it was a smart cabinet put together, politically speaking, for Danielle Smith, for trying to build caucus unity. I think it was smart. I think it was smart to throw Brian Jean in there. Smart just because, I don't think, I talked to him at the convention, and one of the places that conversation went to was the first leadership race, and how there were accusations of, that it wasn't above board. And that is not the case this time. He said that he was very happy with the way that it had, with how the leadership race. He said, he heard from Danielle Smith the next day after she'd won, like a direct call. And he said, the other one who won, he said, I never heard from him at all. So, I think it's a great cabinet post, right? Jobs, economy, and northern development. Obviously, Brian Jean is a northern MLA. It's a good space for him. Seeing Casey Madhu get anything, let alone become deputy premier, was just gross.
Oh, but he was the best.
That was just
He was the best all the way through the race. He was his posture, his strut, he was the bestest poodle. I'm surprised he didn't get a ribbon.
Yeah. So, seeing Rebecca Schulz, Todd Loewen, I knew that was going to happen. Rajan Sawhney, seeing her in, I thought that was, it was nice to see. Talk on the floor at the UCP convention is why Minister, why Leela here wasn't given a cabinet appointment is because Danielle Smith doesn't think she's going to win her nomination.
Well,
so that was talk on the floor.
If Danielle Smith doesn't think that Leela Ahir is going to win her nomination, it has got to be only because she's been actively campaigning against Leela Ahir.
Yeah, there's been some interference.
Right?
I'm going to jump in for a second.
Some...
We've seen a lot of interference coming from the Smith camp from the past, at least the past year, towards Miss Ahir. Leela is still polling okay in general in the riding, but if you talk about the base that went to her AGM and did a full-on takeover,
that's a different people for a CA AGM.
That's insane.
Is ridiculous.
Yeah, but we're talking about Take Back Alberta. We're talking about a whole bunch of different groups that decided to take over, just like they decided to take over half the executive at the party right now. So is there interference? It's maybe because is she not going to be winning her riding? That maybe because that someone decided that she was not going to win her riding. Let's put it that way.
And Chantal de Jong is a prime candidate for a Danielle Smith leader. Put it that way.
Well,
and that's where
Smith
that's
saying,
coming from.
I don't know if she's going to win her constituency. What are you going to do? That's like saying, I set up this tripwire here. I think someone might trip on it. Like, it's just
right.
That's ridiculous. Which is not to say that I'm taking a position either way. I just think that for dumb reasons for a thing that might get the number one spot tonight. Not because of injury, but that anyone would think that is wow. Somebody's newsletter's working is all I'm going to say.
But I thought honestly, like politically speaking, I thought that the cabinet was smart for what Danielle Smith has already said her plan is for 2023. I thought it was smart. She gave as many positions as possible to as many people as possible. And the majority of them are definitely in rural. So, she already laid this out for us, right? In terms of what she said her plan is for 2023, the cabinet committee and parliamentary secretary appointments all make sense. So.
You're not wrong.
I know, isn't that annoying?
I wish you, but see, like that's the thing that I struggle with, because like I look at this cabinet myself, and I look at the two deputy premiers, and I go, so you're going to be spending a lot of time not doing the actual job, hey Danielle, because you've delegated all of the things away so that you can do your weekly Western Standard show. I don't know. Did the contempt come through on that one enough? Do I need to do it again?
No, I think it was dripping with just the perfect amount.
Perfect. That's what I was going for. We got a speaker here that I don't want to leave hanging for too long. Justin, I don't know if you intended to hit the speaker button. If you did, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and share all of the things that we've gotten wrong so far. Or you can not unmute yourself, and I'll just try to cautiously segue around from this.
Oh no, I'm always ready to speak.
Perfect. What's going on, Justin?
So I just I wasn't going to add anything too substantive. I just wanted to go back to what we're talking about, sort of I hate to say like trans issues, but some of the a lot of the rhetoric that I see that is sort of happening, that is informing this sort of like really toxic view of people that are gender nonconforming, not just trans, is that you hear parents saying like, oh, well, what if my kid changes their mind and, they want to change their name or they want to wear a dress? And it's like, yes, they're children. Let them do that. Like the whole idea of of violating any sort of gender norms or gender roles at all is like, it's either you have to be completely the one end, you are you're transitioning, you are on the other side, or you're not. There's no in between. And kids can be kids, and yeah, it's totally fine if if your kid wants to go dressed up, quote unquote, as a girl. What's the problem with that, right? And so that was basically just all I wanted to say, going back to that discussion and being like, yeah, that's also fine. It's
right?
Totally fine for your child to one day want to be a princess and then the next day wants to, I don't know, be a fireman or something. You know what I mean? It's just any sort of violation of the gender binary is induces panic, right? And so it's if you're going to cross that boundary even a little bit, you might as well just be pushed right over, right? So that's what I had to say. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, and it's
thanks, Justin.
It just still boggles my mind so much, because I have two kids, and there was a period of time where one of my kids decided that he wanted to be a cat, and so he's not a cat. It's fine.
Sorry,
but
I was thinking about my daughter who ran around circles in a Superman costume
exactly.
this week.
And there's if there's a difference between if a kid is, if the argument is that we have to worry about kids experimenting with things because it might stick. No, that doesn't happen because my kid's not a cat, and presumably, I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen any pictures of your little one lifting cars, Sarah. If there are, love to see him. But barring that, if it's a phase, it's a phase. And if it's not a phase, if this kid is dealing with actual legitimate gender dysphoria, and you refuse to acknowledge that, you're harming them. That's the math for me. That's what I can't wrap my head around.
And I think too, this is, both useful and not. I think it also depends on the type of supportive, the type of support in the environment that you're in. So if your parents were really strict and they were very strict about gender roles, then you are raised with this feeling that you have to be as well. And if they're not going to support you supporting your child, that reduces the amount of support that you have available to give. So, this is, I'm sure that they would hate to hear this. It's a generational problem. And most problems they are generational, they are passed down. And that's one benefit of public education or the school system, is that you get to bring in things that maybe your parents didn't have the opportunity to engage with. Just saying.
Yeah, heaven forbid our views should evolve in any way. Lynn, what's going on?
Hi, Nate. How are you?
I'm a little fired up tonight, in case you couldn't tell.
Yeah,
but,
me too. I have tons of stuff I could say, but listen, first of all, I am not sad that Ron Orr is gone from representing women in this province. I'm not happy that there is nobody doing it, but I listened to a guy called Inside Russia Konstantin on a YouTube podcast, right? So you guys were talking about her cabinet. And when I looked at it when it came out, I was like horrified. But when I listened to him today, delve deep into how Russia leaders, Stalin, Putin, whoever, do things, this conversation tonight made 100% sense to me, because she is delegating so many of these jobs to other people who she can then blame. So she's not taking accountability for healthcare, because she's going to blame it on Jason.
Mm-hmm.
She's not going to take accountability for, I can't relieve all these pastors who, according to her, have, we can't accuse pastors of anything in this province, on Madhu. You know what I mean? Like, she's, as hard as this is for me to say, she's doing this smartly, but we need to be smarter than her.
Well, she's doing a very dangerous thing very smartly. And I mean, like,
absolutely.
For countries that should be able to go, you know what, maybe we don't just give all of the religious folks a blind pass. I feel like Canada, between the Anglican involvement in residential schools and, I mean, no offense to anyone, but Catholicism, having some accountability and some, no, you still have to follow the rules. I think that's important.
Absolutely. Like, I don't even know what to say. I had a discussion with a teacher today who went to the rally, and we talked about what she could teach at school if they brought in some of these issues. And she's a Catholic school teacher in Fort McMurray. And I just have to tell you guys, when it comes to Fort McMurray, there's a lot of negative stuff that comes out of here. But when it comes to the Catholic schools in this town, you wouldn't believe what these teachers have worked on and taught, mainly because we live on treaty land. And she's like, well, I'm still going to teach that, it was the white man who brought in these things for the residential schools to wipe out genocide, right?
Yeah.
In the way you would teach it to a grade 3 student. And I was like, okay, so you guys are still going to do that? And she goes, 100%. My board will back me every step of the way. So I feel like there's still some defiance, but I guess my main point is I think that what she's doing scares me, because it's following the Russian, Stalin, Putin, the way they do things.
To me, I totally hear what you're saying, and the best way that I can kind of relate to it, I think, or at least rephrase it, is like when you hear about like a really good serial killer, you're kind of like, wow, they did everything right. That's not good. That's kind of what I'm going to as you're talking, because there are people who are very, very, very good at doing very bad things very effectively. And when you see that level of organization, that's, I think, something that everybody needs to be very mindful of, because yikes on bikes.
Well, and I think, I don't know the guy's name, but you have a Venezuelan guy on there. on this podcast who speaks about what it's like to live in that.
Yeah.
And I think we
CJ.
need to listen to him.
Yes, I totally agree.
So I'll listen to him now.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to throw it to you. I don't think CJ's raised his hand today. He's probably a little bit busy because he's a political guy. But I do know that Tammy raised her hand next, and then we got two other people who want to weigh in. So, Tammy, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going? I was laughing when you were talking about your kid saying that, deciding they're a cat. There was a period in my daughter's life. She's now 20-something-ish. Sorry, I lose track of dates and ages because of my stroke. But there was an entire year that she was convinced she was Stitch, as in Lilo and Stitch. The funny thing is that she actually's got quite a talent for doing voices. So she literally spent a year speaking as Stitch. And we all had to learn how to understand Stitch. And oddly enough, you do learn being around them.
Is she still
But that's
Stitch?
not the main. Oh, she's. The funny thing is she wants to get into voice acting.
Oh, see?
Because of that. So it did migrate, and she's amazing at mimicking voices. And she'll watch. Do you know the on the TV, the advertisement about the pothole, and the pothole has like a Texas accent. She does that and just absolutely spot on, can do it 100%. So, she's working it. But that wasn't the main reason why I chimed in tonight. I am so bloody angry. Every single one of them said, yeah, we've got to re-index age. I'm disabled, 2 strokes and cancer, but I'm a lucky person. And that sounds really odd to say, but after 3 years, I was able to find employment, and I am employed in a tangential way to my original job. What I was before I had my 2 strokes. And it's a job that I had always wanted. So you know what? I'm 100%. But I know so many people who aren't that lucky. And I consider it luck. I mean, I happen to have the right background and the right skills and extra skills that I was able to, move into this other job. And I know, speaking to you now, I probably sound 100% normal, but my biggest loss was my ability to speak. And it's not just speaking to you about normal things, but it's all my technical skills, because I was an IT analyst. So when I try to talk about, databases and computer programming languages and that sort of thing, and I start getting a little bit flustered, I'll lose my words, right? They just disappear. I can't speak. And that's why I couldn't get a job for pretty much a year. And the funny thing was, I was applying to all these companies, and what would happen, I would apply, they'd look at my resume and they'd be like, oh yeah, wow, we need her, we want her to come in. But when I'm doing the interview, right, I can't speak that well anymore. So they instantly lose interest. Now, that's someone with all the skills that I have. Can you imagine folks that don't have those kind of skills, that are basically coming into the areas and going into jobs where they're what I would call a minimalized job? They're working at Walmart, or they're working at the dollar store or something, and they're stocking shelves and that sort of thing. To expect that they can't even index AISH, for them to do that, It's horrible, right? And people go, well, why do you care? You make money, you make a big amount of money, you're a technical writer. Because I was there. Like, I've only been in this new position for 6 months. And my boss says, I'll kill anyone who tries to take you away from me because you're great. But I'm lucky. That's the fact that I had previous skills that I was able to migrate into the job I'm in now. But that was hard. And they're just, oh yeah, we're going to do this. Every single one of them said they were going to reindex age. Now they're not.
Well, it's not that they're
What the heck?
to be technical, and I really don't want to present it as if I'm giving any kind of wiggle room, because as you could tell earlier, I'm a little bit fired up over it too. But I think that when we're talking about it, it's not that they haven't said that they're not going to. It's just it's dropped completely off the radar, and the way that they're communicating about it, they're now saying that it's going to be a community and social services thing, which doesn't have the bandwidth to do it. And so that's one of those. I'm not saying that there's no longer hope, but it's not looking good.
It's a way for them to shuffle it to the wayside without saying we're not going to do it.
Yep.
And not doing it.
Yep, totally.
That's exactly what they're doing. So I won't give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, they didn't say they weren't going to do it. No, I worked in big business long enough to know that when you shuffle something to the side like that, it means it's not happening. It's a nice way of doing it, right? And nice in quotation marks. It's a way of doing it without saying, no, we aren't doing it.
Yeah, I don't.
So no,
I don't disagree.
I won't give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to not swear. They're treating disabled people like pawns. And everybody that had the gall to say, well, the NDP only did it to try and win the election. I don't care if they only did it to try to win the election. They still did it.
Well, and the UCP
and the
undid
first
it.
thing first thing the UCP came in and did was shut it down.
Yep.
So I don't care. I don't care if the NDP only did it to try to win the election. The fact is, if they had won, and every single Albertan who voted for the UCP and still says, well, I give to this thing or this thing to help the disabled, you still don't freaking care. You don't care about the disabled people, because giving them a Christmas dinner, you think that makes up, that one day of a year makes up for the rest of 364 that they're scraping together to live? It is so much bullcrap. I give them no level of leeway with their, we're Christian. No, you're not. If you were Christian, you would care. Oh, you're telling me I don't care? Yes, because you support a government who will willingly shove disabled people to the side.
And
so you're not being very Christian.
I think the big thing, Tammy, that I wish that Miss Smith and her new cabinet could hear is the frustration and the disappointment and the anger that you're conveying there, because it is very, very easy for people who don't have to contend with the kind of things that, and it's so different. Like, one person's experience with disability is going to be radically different than another person's experience with disability. And I totally hear you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I had one guy on oh, not Indeed, the other thing, LinkedIn, a woman say, well, disabled people make a lot of money. I'm like, are you kidding? $16.85 a month, and that's one of the bigger amounts in Alberta. You think that's lots of money to live on? You're crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm done.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tammy. We've got a list
Thank
going
you.
on over here on the side of who we got to get to next. Guy is next, and then it's Mark, and then we got a couple other people that we're going with. So we're going late again tonight, folks. Looks like. Hope you packed a lunch. But Guy, what's going on?
Nate, what a great show. You got a really great program and great speakers. So I'm really enjoying it very, very much.
Well, thank you. It's everybody else. I just make noise.
No, you cover a lot of really great, great topics and subject areas. So I really appreciate it. I want to entertain or a question, I guess. I'm really curious what Deirdre and Sarah might have to say about this as well. I'm wondering if it's possible that as we march on to the next election next year, are we falling into a trap where the next election is going to be about us versus them, urban versus rural, kind of thing. And the only reason why I bring this up, Nate, is I've traveled throughout Alberta, still do. And, certainly a lot of the small towns and stuff that I've been to in this province, they have a hard time relating, I guess, to city issues, right? If you're driving on the eastern, part of the province and all you can hear on, mainstream radio is, big debates about, LRT funding in Edmonton. Well, that doesn't relate very well, in places, west of, on the east part of, the province. But, I've taken a lot of, shows like this, other conventional media and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if we're devolving into this us versus them, instead of having sort of a unifying message where we're actually bringing people together, as opposed to saying, look at over there, that's just, bad shit crazy. Nobody should have, anything to do with it, type of thing. Now, having said that, Nate, I absolutely agree. There's some really bad shit crazy stuff out there. And there's lots of stuff I certainly don't subscribe to. But, as I've come to visit different places in rural Alberta, especially, I've met a lot of really decent people. These are not crazy people. These are not even gun owners half the time.
Yeah.
These are people that love this province just like everyone else. And, they feel like they're being lumped into this really negative cohort, I guess. And they're not a part of that. So
yeah, I'm gonna let Sarah go first.
I wanted to.
She's already got her hand up.
Yeah, I want to throw two. And
before she does, I just want to be very, very clear, because the concern that you raised is totally valid. And so before Sarah jumps in, I just want to say I was raised in rural Alberta, and I grew up like from teenage years in Calgary. I've had the privilege of living on both of the areas that Alberta has to offer on the rural urban divide. And I want to be, what you said at the end there was bang on. The problem that Alberta has is absolutely not a rural Alberta versus urban Alberta problem. That's not the problem. The problem that we have to contend with, as far as I'm concerned, is we have a crazy people problem, or a bad people problem, or however we want to phrase, ignorant, spiteful, mean, insecure. I don't know what the words are, but that's not a characteristic of rural or urban. I'll paraphrase myself this way, and then I'm gonna get out of Sarah's way. I would be willing to bet per capita there's an equal number of assholes, rurally and urban. I think that it's probably, whatever the percentage is, 10, 15%. I would say that it's probably about that percent wherever you go in the province. But Sarah, what do you think?
It's going to be interesting to see how the strategists because they could put it as a rural versus urban problem if they choose to do so. They could do it a Rachel versus Daniel problem if they choose to do so. This summer when I worked on Lila's campaign, something that I really discovered was local solutions for local problems. So, but I think that the parties need to find 3 issues that every single one in the province can agree with and can relate to. Because at the end of the day, the problems that are being, a lot of those problems are being manufactured by the strategists. And we need to remember that. The messaging that the parties very often carry, let's say more for the UCP more so than the NDP, at the moment talks for a very, very, very small minority. So if I was the NDP, I would focus on local solution for local problems, but be able to talk, let's say, jobs. Well, I'm going to say jobs, economy, pipelines, but it's just an example. We all miss it, don't we? But, at the end of the day, the issues will be the issues whenever the strategists decide that an issue will become an issue, if that answers your question.
Deirdre, you're rural Alberta?
I am rural Alberta. And, this is, I know that a lot of people get very upset when it seems like I'm being a UCP apologist. But the thing is that I live in rural. I grew up in rural. My circles are quite rural. I understand. I speak conservative, put it that way. I understand that the issues go beyond rural urban, but the way that Smith is looking at attacking this next election, I think you are going to see an urban versus rural. And you're going to see that because that's what Smith needs to do in order to retain her 39 rural seats. And rural includes the Edmonton Donut and everything outside of Edmonton and Calgary. That's everything. But I think you're going to see that just because she's already, like I said before, she's already detailed her election strategy. She maintains the rural seats. She only needs a couple of seats out of Calgary. I think it's 5 or 6. And she maintains a majority government because of the fact that it's winnable that way for her. I think that's what she is going to end up doing. She does need to keep 5 or 6 Calgary seats, but again, that might not be too hard. However, I have friends who are door knocking in Calgary for the NDP, and they have let me know what they're hearing on the doors. And the biggest threat to the UCP maintaining the 39 seats that they already have in rural Alberta, as well as 5 or 6 in Calgary, is that the people who are pissed off are going to do exactly the same they did in 2015, which is stay home. So it's not a shoo-in. And, some people do thrive on the urban-rural debate or argument, but not everyone does. And that could backfire. So, I mean, it already is to a point, right? Urban people are currently saying it shouldn't be urban versus rural. So, I mean, Sarah's got a point there too, is whatever they decide to do, but it will be Rachel versus Danielle. It will be urban versus rural because that's where they need to win. The NDP could take it, getting all of the seats in Edmonton and Calgary, right? They could win the election. So you just sort of see this organic divide because of what the two political parties who are most likely to form government need to do in order to do that is a diametrically opposing strategy. And I expect that is exactly what we're going to see, unfortunately.
And that is unfortunate. Hope that answers your questions there, Guy. We got a couple people I want to try to get to before we hit the magical 2-hour mark where my laptop says nope. So, Mark, what's going on tonight? You bet you've been waiting patiently for quite some time, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for raising R-Star. I think it's one of the most important issues in Alberta going on today, and I think that this is probably the first time it's been openly discussed. So, congratulations on that. As you said, R-Star is a royalty for oil well cleanup scheme that has been. Our new premier was a lobbyist for this scheme before, which was rejected by Alberta Energy and by Treasury. And so we need to know why that was rejected. I think that will become obvious. I think it needs to be an election issue, but I'm afraid it won't be. I'm afraid we'll have it installed before an election. But the reasons it should be an election issue are its massive potential cost to Alberta citizens of between $40 and $70 billion to clean up these oil wells. We have estimated those costs at Alberta Liabilities Disclosure Project using AER figures. The second reason would be it's a major change to how the current system of how orphan wells are currently managed. And third, it's a drilling incentive. So these royalty credits would only be applied if you drill more wells. So there's a potential to drill a lot more unprofitable wells, further increasing the unmanaged oil and gas liability problem in general, increasing the size of the cost to taxpayers. So it's an extremely important matter. I just tell people that I put a lot of the factual links. There's videos about it between Danielle Smith and Mr. Kinnear that you had mentioned. I've got them on my Twitter timeline, and people can check out the facts there. But if you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But I just wanted to express thanks because we can't afford this project, this proposal. I'm a director of the Polluter Pay Federation. We stand for, we have pretty good laws in Alberta for making the polluter pay, but we're not enforcing them. And this would be, whether under Ms. Smith's proposal or our proposals, it would be a major job creator. We're not cleaning up this stuff as fast as we should be. But we can do it at no cost to the citizen or the taxpayer under the current law, just by enforcing current law, or we can make the change and the citizens can pay for the sins of industry. It's everybody's choice. And I think that needs to be a clear and transparent choice by making it election issue. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this incredibly important topic.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mark, I really love the explanation that you did there, and I agree with you. It is an incredibly important issue. It's one of those ones that sounds very technical, and so I think that a lot of people kind of go, that sounds like a lot of almost math. But if you'd be up for it, I would love to have a conversation with you for a whole separate episode where we can get really into the weeds on the whole R-Star thing, because we do have a lot of policy folks that love that kind of stuff who follow the show. So I'm gonna send you a DM as soon as we're done this, because it is, from everything that I've read, and I'm not that smart, it looks like a train wreck waiting to happen, and you explained that very well. So I think we need to revisit it.
I would be most happy to do that. I would suggest, respectfully, Reagan Boychuk was on earlier. He's gone to bed. He's also, he's the person that estimated the liabilities. And both of us participated in the government's liability management, sessions in the past, and one time for 6 days. So we're highly familiar with this. We know the laws. We know the system. We have written job report that the R-Star program came out in opposition to. So we have a published solutions. So we'd be more than happy to do a full episode on it.
Awesome. Yeah, I will get in touch as soon as we're done. I'd love to have you both on. Thank you for that. Moving through the list, we got CJ. Carlos, my friend, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, being a policy nerd, as you know, and as you might have guessed, yeah, I was spending this weekend very busy in an event that is very opposite to Deidre's.
Well, it wasn't Deirdre's event. She just attended it. So let's
Well,
not...
the one that she attended, you know.
It's,
it was very opposite. It was very opposite. I feel like
the pictures look very energetic.
No, I just wanted to talk about this new cabinet because we got to talk about it. You know, for those of you who don't know, I'm a labor guy. I come from the labor movement. That's where, and I'm gonna throw out a name, and I don't want people to hiss at me when I say it. Gil McGowan gave a speech, and he said, "Workers are the economy. Workers are the economy," and that is exactly the reason why we don't have a labor minister anymore. It's because Danielle Smith is afraid shitless of workers.
How do you really feel?
She really. that like that.
That's fair. Okay.
Yeah, like that. She's scared shitless of workers, and honestly, props to her because she should be. Because we are all workers. We are all people who make our living in one way or another. Whether you are a small business person, or whether you're a student who works like me, or whether you are like my grandfather who got arrested protesting through his union back home. You know. Because they were also scared shitless of the workers. And I just gotta say, this is a smart cabinet, but it's not smart enough, because when you have that many people in cabinet that gotta keep cabinet confidence, and that many people who have to toe the party line, we have already started bringing out the lettuce head, you know.
Yeah,
we need to. You should get on that.
Well, you know, I'm not saying I've got a trip planned to the grocery store this week, but it might be the puppet might be a little bit easier than we thought.
Yeah, that's honestly how I feel. And just speaking on the race thing, that how the UCP doesn't want to teach race to our kids. Not to pat myself or the people I work with politically on the back, but we actually, as a result, wrote a policy on that we must teach the history of racialized Canadians to all children beginning in kindergarten. Unfortunately, it didn't get to debate. It was just, that's how it happened. So there were 60 resolutions we had to get through this week. But I just want people to see the difference, you know, between what is and what could be. And if the NDP is not your cup of tea, go look at the Alberta Party. If the Alberta Party is not your cup of tea, I hear the Liberals are looking for people right now. Just find somebody who you like at this point and raise hell as best you can. And that's honestly all I gotta say.
That's cool. And if, you know, just because we just had him on the show like a week ago, if your only thing is electoral reform, Jordan Wilkie and the Greens, that's their whole platform. So
yes, I forgot about him.
There's lots of options. That's all I'll say. We got one person left that I want to make sure that we get to. Claire, you've been waiting patiently. I don't know if you're still there or not, but if you are, I want to give you the opportunity to have sort of the last words of the evening. If you're not there. Oh.
Awesome. No, I'm here. Thanks so much. Sort of new to the space. Hi, folks. I just wanted to, had a lot of comments, but the one that I really wanted to speak to was Tammy's discussion of the impacts of AISH continuing to be de-indexed, and the uncertainty of whether it is going to be re-indexed at any point in the near future, or if that's going to be another broken promise, or what we can expect. So thank you, Tammy, for speaking truth to power. That was really important. And I wanted to say, not only is it vital that we re-index AISH and that we push for it and keep making noise about it. But we can't let that be the bar, because re-indexed AISH is not enough to allow people with disabilities to live with dignity and to live lives that aren't struggling, like right straddling the poverty line.
I mean, you're 100% right.
Yeah, and
it's hard to add
sorry,
anything to that because
my mic cut out for a sec.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're bang on.
So I wanted to say to that, whoever forms the next government, whether it is another era of UCP or whether it's NDP or whether some other unicorn party shows up, we can't let this continue, because to be blunt, disability issues are never any government's priority, because as a group, it is incredibly easy to ignore our voices, because by the nature of our oppression, we are incredibly likely to live in poverty and to already be, struggling to survive, and also, have often difficulty organizing and getting people to take us seriously, because ableism is still so rampant in our society. And no one deserves to live in poverty because of their disability. Disabled people matter, and we're talented, we're smart, we're whole people, and we deserve to be able to live lives where we're not constantly having to go to the food bank every week and, never being able to buy fresh food because, that's not what we can afford. Whether AISH is indexed or not is not the only issue, and it shouldn't be the goalpost. So whoever forms government, please don't let disability become the issue that gets shunted to the side again, because we're in a crisis in Alberta. I know that the entire province is on fire right now, but with the new medical assistance in dying legislation, there are people in our province who are choosing to die for the sole fact that they are disabled and are living in legislated poverty, and they don't have to. And it's disgusting. It's eugenics, and these are your friends, these are your family, and a lot of people who are able-bodied don't want to think about this because it's really scary, but at any point you could become disabled. You could have some life-changing medical event or an accident or a condition that gets worse all of a sudden that makes you one of our community. I currently am not living in poverty. I'm really, lucky to come from a upper middle class background and be educated and have a ton of support networks. But at any point I could be, my disability could take a turn for the worse, or something could happen to my support networks and I could be living on the streets. That's what life is when you have a disability. You never know what the future is going to hold, and you always have to be prepared for the worst, whether it's because of your health or because of the factors around you that could push you into poverty in a split second. And no one deserves that. And it's something that is so preventable. If we take care of each other, we can make life worth living and not have people who are friends and family members and community members choose to die because they have no other choice, because life in poverty is so horrible. So that's all I wanted to say. So, there are a lot of really great points, but please, whether you're disabled or not, don't let this fall to the background. Whoever forms government, please keep pushing and, elevate the voices of people with disabilities, share our stories, support us, and please, whoever forms government, don't let just re-indexing AISH become the goalpost and then, all right, we did it. That's all, folks. Good job, because it's not enough. Anyways, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to say that's exactly the type of correction that I love to get here, because you're absolutely right. The conversation has been around reindexing because it's the thing that was taken away. And you're 100% right. It is, reindexing is the very, very, I don't even know if it's the bare minimum. I think it might be less. And it comes back to that quote that I love to use over and over again: the measure of any society is how well they take care of their weak and their infirm. And if that's the goal, if that's the meter stick that we're using, boy, we're stuck on suck, and we need to address that. So, Claire, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it's perfect that you're ending the night there, because, man, I can't imagine how anyone's going to follow that. So I will. I'm going to say a big thank you to everybody who spoke tonight. I'm going to say a big thank you especially to Deirdre and Sarah Biggs. Deirdre, as always, you went into the belly of the beast this weekend. So just as a wrap up, Deirdre, you got anything else that you want to throw out to the ether before I clear the room with the plugs?
I think one of the things that I did right before I went to the conference, I was supposed to do it 2 weeks prior, but I was trying to make up some business cards because I don't have any, and I was supposed to come out with, five people who I could, refer back to. And when I was writing up the card, it asked for, message from your business, and I ended up with, we need to talk. And, I love the way that you always end the spaces with keep the conversation going, because that really is, and I see it more and more all the time, is that, the other side has become the enemy, and they're not the enemy, they're your neighbors.
Yep.
So we need to talk.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, the way that I would also look at it is politics is so easy to get polarized in, and it's so easy to get that us versus them thing going on. And as tempting as it is some days to just be like, man, I just wish I could just punch that person in the face. The reality is that the people who need us to keep that conversation going the most need us to have that conversation, because walking up to somebody who's I don't know, voting for a hateful policy at the UCV convention that's going to hurt kids, walking up to them and punching them in the face isn't going to change their mind. It's probably only going to increase their desire to pursue those policies. And the bottom line is, those kids need to have people have their minds changed. And that's not going to happen with as much as it would be deeply, deeply cathartic. It's not going to happen by feeding people punches. And same thing. I mean, same thing with any of the people who are underrepresented. They need people to speak up. They need people to be willing to have those conversations. So love it.
But Nate, can I just add something? Because I'm seeing that a very certain person is listening right now. And I just want to say, throughout the campaign this summer, one thing that I have learned, and I want to thank her for that, is to learn to shut up and listen, like you said. And try to understand. Everybody knows I have very strong stance on vaccination. Everybody knows I have very strong stance, like when it comes to, COVID and how we mitigate with that. I had very loud opinions, but one thing, and I'm going to name her Leela, and I know she's listening right now. She taught me how to listen to everybody. And I think that's something that we could all do right now, is listening to everybody, not solely try to stay in our echo chamber, and try to validate each other. I have been some conversations this summer that was so uncomfortable. But you know what? At the end of the day, I understand both sides and I can write better policy. So that's just what I wanted to say.
There we go. And I'm pretty sure you just told me to shut up. So I'm gonna take that as the opportunity to wrap things up. Again, big thank you to everyone for sharing your thoughts, for listening, for all of that. As always, here's the plug. This is where we watch the room population dwindle to like 3. But as always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters for the price of a fancy cup of coffee a month. It helps to keep the lights on and buy the toys that make all of the audio and the streaming and the video and the things work. You do that at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Big thank you to everybody who is supporting us there on Patreon, and I totally appreciate that there's a lot of people who don't have the means by which to do that right now. So even likes and shares, that helps get the words out there. Yeah, I just want to say thank you again to I love that we're getting another episode out of just the conversations that we've had tonight, and I'm looking forward to chatting more about the debacle, it sounds like, that's going to potentially be our star, so look for that. We're dropping our interview with Alberta Party leader Barry Morishita on, fingers crossed, Wednesday. The last week was a little nutty, so things got a little bit delayed, but we're dropping it on Wednesday, and then we'll be back next Sunday for another one of our These Things. And that's pretty much it. Everybody take care. Have a great week. And this one's just for you, Deirdre. Keep the conversation going.